The 3 psychological traps that destroy your power. A Machiavellian analysis introduction. The world is divided into 3 categories of people: the hunters, the hunted, and those skilled enough to camouflage themselves until they decide which role to play. Niccolò Machiavelli understood something that most people still refuse to accept in our modern world. Power isn't about being the loudest voice in the room or the most charismatic personality at the party. Power is about psychological positioning. It's about understanding the invisible dynamics that control every human interaction, every negotiation, every relationship you'll ever have. Recognition is the first step toward transformation, and by the end of this analysis, you'll understand exactly how to rewire these patterns and position yourself as someone who commands respect without demanding it, someone who influences without begging, and someone who holds power without anyone quite understanding how you got it. Today, we're going to expose 3 psychological traps that are silently destroying your influence and making you an easy target for manipulation, because every post begging for likes, every explanation that goes on too long, every desperate attempt to be seen as intelligent or worthy, it's all the same psychological vulnerability he identified 5 centuries ago. When you find yourself explaining your choices to people who didn't ask, when you're justifying your boundaries to those who've crossed them, they know exactly which psychological buttons to push. They can withhold validation and watch you crumble. They can give false validation and watch you dance to their tune. When you're seeking approval for decisions that only affect you, what are you really saying? These aren't obvious weaknesses that scream vulnerability. You're in a meeting, and you present an idea. They don't seek immediate feedback. They don't fill the silence with nervous explanations. A validation-addicted person will present their idea and then immediately begin defending it. Before anyone has even responded, the first person appears uncertain, desperate for approval, easy to dismiss. The second person appears confident, self-possessed, worthy of consideration. When people can't fully read you, when they can't predict your reactions, they think this transparency will earn them trust and connection, but it actually earns them pity and manipulation. When they don't have complete information about your motivations and insecurities, they treat you with more respect and caution. Now, I know this might sound crazy, or I'm not sure if this is right, or what do you guys think? Am I onto something here? This isn't emotional intelligence, it's emotional dependency. They're disguised as virtues. They masquerade as emotional intelligence, empathy, and social grace. My internal compass isn't reliable. I need external validation to feel confident in my own decisions. Who seeks feedback on every decision? Who wants to make sure everyone understands their perspective? They appear thoughtful, collaborative, emotionally mature. But to the trained Machiavellian eye, they're nothing more than neon signs, flashing one message: this person can be controlled. If you recognize yourself in what we're about to discuss, don't panic. They're revealing their insecurities, their fears, their weak points. Every explanation is a map to their emotional core. Every justification is a confession of their uncertainty. And it's epidemic in our hyper-connected, social media-driven world. Let's begin with the most dangerous trap of all. You see it everywhere, in the person who over-explains their decisions, in the individual who constantly seeks approval for their choices, in the professional who can't make a move without consensus. Trap 1. The validation addiction to 30 to 12 o'clock. The first psychological trap is what I call the validation addiction. This trap manifests as an insatiable need to be understood, appreciated, and validated by others. Machiavelli would have looked at our modern validation culture with cold fascination. The need to be understood is, fundamentally, an admission that your value is up for negotiation. Think about this carefully. You're saying, my judgment isn't enough, and the moment someone senses this need in you, they have leverage. Here's what's particularly insidious about this trap. It often looks like emotional intelligence, the person who constantly checks in with others. But Machiavelli would see through this immediately. The validation-addicted person is constantly leaking information about their psychological state, and predatory personalities, those who instinctively understand power dynamics, They collect this information like intelligence agents. They file it away for future use. Let me give you a practical example. Compare this to someone who has broken free from the validation trap. They present their idea clearly and then stop talking. They don't preemptively defend it. The difference in how these two approaches are received is stark. This isn't about arrogance or dismissing other people's input. It's about understanding that your need for validation is a weakness that others will exploit. Machiavelli understood that mystery is a form of power. The validation-addicted person gives away their mystery. They're emotionally transparent to the point of vulnerability. So, how do you begin to break free from this trap? First, you must develop what I call internal validation sovereignty. This means becoming your own primary source of approval and confidence. It means trusting your judgment, even when others disagree. It means being comfortable with being misunderstood. Second, you must learn the power of strategic silence. This is perhaps the most challenging aspect, because most people have been conditioned since childhood to seek approval and avoid disappointment. Practice making decisions without seeking input from everyone in your circle. Practice being misunderstood without rushing to correct the misunderstanding. But as long as someone's disapproval can change your behavior, they have power over you. When someone doesn't understand your decision, resist the urge to explain. When someone questions your judgment, resist the urge to justify. Let your actions speak louder than your explanations. Third, you must become comfortable with disapproval. Practice saying no without elaborate explanations. And one of the most primal fears we have is social rejection, being cast out, labeled as selfish, cruel, or unworthy of belonging. And influence are those who have learned to tolerate disapproval and social discomfort. This doesn't mean becoming callous or dismissive of others. You see it in the person who says yes to requests they should decline because they're afraid of seeming unhelpful. You're allowing others to control your behavior through fear. They've learned to use your reputation concerns against you. You're in the reputation prison. Your behavior is being shaped not by your values or judgment, but by your fear of social disapproval. But in our modern context, the choice isn't quite so stark. You don't need to be feared. You simply need to stop fearing disapproval. They'll make subtle accusations. Wow, that's not very considerate of you. The person trapped by reputation concerns will undervalue their contributions, avoid necessary confrontations, and fail to establish clear boundaries. Decline an invitation you don't want to accept. Without providing an elaborate excuse, express disagreement in a group setting instead of nodding along. Set a boundary with someone who's been taking advantage of your accommodating nature. What do you actually believe in, beneath all the social conditioning and people-pleasing? What would you stand for if you knew no one would judge you? When someone expresses disappointment in your choices or calls you selfish, practice responding with calm indifference rather than defensive justification. They'll work harder than necessary, accept less than they deserve. People who try to control your behavior through guilt, shame, or social pressure are usually doing so because direct, honest communication would be less effective for their purposes, and allow others to take credit for their efforts, all because they're afraid of being seen as difficult or selfish. You'll notice that while some people may initially be frustrated by your new boundaries, most will actually respect you more, or they'll express disappointment. I thought you were more understanding than that. Or they'll imply social consequences. I am not sure others will see it that way. You see it in the professional who doesn't advocate for themselves because they don't want to appear pushy or demanding. You see it in the individual who tolerates disrespectful behavior because calling it out might seem too dramatic. They simply understand that you cannot lead effectively if your decisions are constantly filtered through the question, "What will people think of me?" It means developing a strong enough sense of self that you don't need constant external confirmation to function effectively. From childhood, we're taught to be nice, to be polite, to be agreeable. Don't hurt anyone's feelings. Don't rock the boat. Don't be difficult. Always consider how others might react to your choices. Remember, the person who needs to be understood is always at the mercy of those who choose whether or not to understand them. Trap 2. The reputation prison command higher salaries. and receive more respect, not because they're more talented, but because they're comfortable with occasional disapproval. The second psychological trap is more subtle but equally destructive. I call it the reputation prison, and it is built from one of humanity's most manipulated fears, the fear of being seen as bad. This trap is insidious because it weaponizes your moral identity against you. It turns your desire to be seen as good, ethical, and virtuous into a tool for control and manipulation. Machiavelli observed that people are more often controlled by their fears than by their desires. Our entire social conditioning reinforces this fear. But here is the Machiavellian truth that most people never grasp. The individuals who rise to positions of real power, they're not cruel or heartless. The reputation prison manifests in countless ways. Every time you modify your authentic response because you're worried about how you'll be perceived, and manipulative personalities understand this instinctively. If these kinds of statements make you reconsider your position or soften your stance, this is particularly damaging. In professional environments, meanwhile, their colleagues who aren't trapped by these concerns advance more quickly. Machiavelli would argue that if you must choose between being feared and being loved, choose fear. This requires what I call reputation courage, the willingness to be misunderstood, criticized, or even disliked when your principles or well-being are at stake. Reputation courage doesn't mean being needlessly antagonistic or cruel. It means being willing to prioritize your authentic values over your social image when the two conflict. Here's a practical framework for developing this courage. First, identify your core values and principles. Second, practice small acts of reputation courage. Third, develop tolerance for criticism and disapproval. Remember that criticism often reveals more about the critic than about you. Fourth, observe the difference in how people treat you when you stop prioritizing their approval. The paradox of reputation courage is that people generally respect those who aren't desperate for their respect. Confidence and self-possession are attractive qualities, while neediness and people-pleasing often generate pity or contempt. When you help someone because you genuinely want to help, rather than because you're afraid of seeming selfish, your help is more valuable and more respected. This doesn't mean abandoning empathy or consideration for others. It means ensuring that your empathy and consideration come from a place of choice rather than fear. The goal isn't to become callous or uncaring. The goal is to become immune to manipulation through reputation threats. When someone can no longer control your behavior by threatening to think poorly of you, this is the desperate need for peace, harmony, and predictability at all costs. They must engage with you on more honest and direct terms. They emerge from pressure, challenge, and strategic discomfort. They want smooth relationships, predictable outcomes, and minimal conflict. Did it come from comfort or from pushing through discomfort? Every promotion, every meaningful relationship, every personal breakthrough required you to step outside your comfort zone and face uncertainty. They believe that peace is the ultimate goal and that any disruption to harmony is inherently negative. They say it's fine when it's not fine. They avoid addressing problems until they become crises. They sacrifice their long-term well-being for short-term peace. It creates an illusion of peace while allowing underlying problems to fester and grow. And that's where real relationships and genuine respect begin. The comfort-addicted person will tolerate disrespectful treatment rather than risk an uncomfortable conversation. They'll agree publicly while disagreeing privately. When you can remain calm during conflict, when you don't desperately need everyone to be happy, you become the person others look to for leadership and decision-making. They'll absorb others' negative emotions to avoid conflict. When there's conflict or disagreement in a group, resist the urge to smooth things over. Let the tension exist. Practice not taking other people's emotions personally. Practice maintaining your position even when others are upset about it. Observe how it creates space for honest communication and genuine resolution. If someone is disappointed by your decision, let them be disappointed. Make decisions that involve uncertainty and risk. If someone is frustrated by your boundary, let them be frustrated, so that you can make decisions based on wisdom and values rather than fear and avoidance. Because their power is always conditional on others' emotional states. When someone realizes that their anger, disappointment, or disapproval won't change your behavior, the reputation prison, and the comfort addiction, let us discuss how to integrate this understanding into a comprehensive approach to personal power. It's about developing the internal strength and clarity that naturally commands respect and influence. They must engage with you on more mature and direct terms. Their emotions are information about them, not instructions for you. You see this in people who immediately try to fix others' problems. Something remarkable happens. You begin operating from a place of genuine choice rather than unconscious reaction. But through demonstrating that you can navigate difficult situations with composure and principle. Who can't let someone be upset without rushing to comfort them? Who take responsibility for managing everyone else's emotions? Trap 3. The comfort addiction. The third and perhaps most destructive psychological trap is what I call the comfort addiction, and suppress their authentic responses to maintain a facade of tranquility. You can be honest when honesty is needed. You can be firm when firmness is required. You can take calculated risks when opportunities arise. Machiavelli understood something that modern psychology is only beginning to acknowledge: growth, power, and achievement don't emerge from comfortable environments. Because when you're unwilling to risk temporary discomfort, you become unable to create meaningful change in your relationships, career, or personal development. When you need others to be comfortable for you to be comfortable, you've given them enormous power over your emotional state. Yet most people organize their entire lives around avoiding discomfort. This is a profound misunderstanding of how power dynamics actually work. The comfort-addicted person becomes soft, passive, and overly accommodating. They avoid difficult conversations, tolerate microaggressions, but this comfort comes at an enormous cost. It costs them respect, influence, and genuine connection. Think about every significant achievement in your life. Yet in day-to-day life, most people run from these opportunities. This pattern is particularly visible in interpersonal relationships. But here's what they don't realize: this behavior doesn't actually create peace. Meanwhile, those who understand Machiavellian principles know that strategic discomfort is a tool for creating genuine resolution and establishing clear boundaries. When you're willing to enter uncomfortable conversations, the comfort addiction also manifests as an inability to tolerate other people's emotional discomfort. This might seem compassionate, but Machiavelli would recognize it as a form of weakness. Strategic leaders understand that sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do is allow someone to experience the consequences of their choices, even if those consequences are uncomfortable. This doesn't mean being cruel or indifferent to suffering. It means understanding that your desperate need to eliminate all discomfort often prevents necessary growth and change. Here's how to begin breaking free from the comfort addiction. First, practice entering tension without trying to resolve it immediately. Second, develop what I call conflict stamina, the ability to remain calm and centered during disagreements or confrontations. Third, stop managing other people's emotional states. Fourth, regularly challenge yourself with voluntary discomfort. Take on projects that stretch your abilities. Have conversations you've been avoiding. The goal isn't to become needlessly confrontational or to seek conflict for its own sake. The goal is to become comfortable with discomfort. When you're no longer addicted to comfort, you gain access to a much wider range of responses and strategies. Most importantly, you stop being controlled by other people's emotional reactions. This is how respect is earned and influence is built, not through making everyone happy. Remember, the person who needs everyone to be comfortable will never be truly powerful. The integration, becoming psychologically untouchable. Now that we've identified these 3 psychological traps, the validation addiction, the transformation we're describing isn't about becoming cold or manipulative. It's about becoming psychologically untouchable. When you're free from the need for constant validation, when you're not imprisoned by reputation concerns, and when you're not addicted to comfort. This shift is immediately visible to others. Even if they can't articulate what's different about you, you carry yourself differently. You speak with more weight. You make decisions with more clarity. They seek your opinion rather than assuming they can dismiss your perspective. You handle pressure with more composure. You're not learning to fake confidence or pretend to be unbothered. You're actually becoming someone who doesn't need external validation, who isn't controlled by reputation fears, and who can navigate discomfort with grace. People begin treating you as someone whose time and attention have value. They become more careful with their words around you. This isn't because you've become intimidating or unapproachable. It's because you've become unmanipulable through conventional social pressure. The key to this transformation is understanding that these changes must happen at the identity level, not just the behavioral level. Become someone who naturally attracts respect and influence. Because you operating from a place of genuine strength rather than desperate need. They learn patterns that our society often rewards in the short term, but that ultimately limit our potential and effectiveness. But the alternative, remaining trapped by these psychological vulnerabilities, is far more costly in the long run. Choose one area where you've been seeking validation and practice relying on your own judgment instead. Identify one situation where reputation fears have been controlling your behavior and practice acting from your authentic values. Find one area where you've been avoiding discomfort and practice leaning into it with composure. You gain access to a level of personal freedom and effectiveness that most people never experience. You can pursue opportunities without being paralyzed by fear of failure. Who can make difficult decisions with wisdom, and who can remain centered in the midst of chaos? These are the qualities of true leadership, and they're available to anyone willing to do the psychological work required to develop them. It is about developing the internal strength that allows you to connect and contribute from a place of choice rather than need. It is about understanding the deeper dynamics of human behavior and positioning yourself to operate from strength rather than weakness. You can continue operating from these three psychological traps, remaining vulnerable to manipulation and limited in your effectiveness. Or you can begin the work of becoming psychologically untouchable, developing the inner strength that naturally commands respect and creates opportunities. And that development begins with recognizing and eliminating the psychological vulnerabilities that keep you operating from a place of weakness rather than strength. You can express your authentic thoughts without being consumed by worry about others' reactions. You can make decisions based on wisdom and values rather than social pressure. This requires consistent practice and honest self-reflection. You must catch yourself when you slip back into old patterns. You must recognize when you're seeking validation, when you're modifying your behavior out of reputation fears, or when you're avoiding necessary discomfort. But the rewards of this work are profound. Most importantly, you. This is the essence of Machiavellian psychology applied to personal development. It's not about manipulation or exploitation. Conclusion: the path forward: 38 minutes and 0 seconds to 40 minutes and 0 seconds. The three psychological traps we've discussed: the validation addiction, the reputation prison, and the comfort addiction, are not character flaws or moral failings. Breaking free from these patterns requires courage, consistency, and a willingness to tolerate the temporary discomfort that comes with change. Start small. Remember that this work is not about becoming heartless or disconnected from others. The world needs people who can think clearly under pressure. Machiavelli understood that power is not something you take from others. It is something you develop within yourself. The choice is yours. The path forward is clear. The only question is whether you have the courage to walk it. We explore the darker truths of human nature and the strategic principles that separate those who lead from those who follow. Your subscription helps us continue delivering this level of depth and analysis. If this analysis has provided you with valuable insights into the psychology of power and influence, consider subscribing to our channel. Remember, knowledge without action is just entertainment. The real transformation begins when you close this video and start applying these principles in your daily life. Check Control's Sonnet 4.